Day 2 of COP25, the UN's climate change summit taking place in Madrid. Heads of state took to the stage to tell the world that policies should put people's needs first. Leaders of some of the countries most affected by the climate crisis called out wealthier nations for polluting more whilst escaping the worst effects. Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina said climate change had become an existential threat for all countries, and vulnerable island nations are bearing the brunt of the damage, despite having contributed very little to the gas emissions heating up the planet. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in Madrid for us, live at the conference. Morning to you, Darren. So, the conference really has just got started, a fortnight's worth. What happened yesterday and what have we got to look forward to today?
Yes, you say things got properly underway yesterday with the opening ceremony, and those same stark and rather dark warnings about the future of the planet if things do not change. We have from the UN Secretary-General suggesting that this was a turning point from EU leaders who were here in their numbers yesterday. The President of the Parliament, the Commission and the Council saying that the EU for them was now a priority, climate change, and that they were really trying to make an effort to lead the world in this, even though the EU contributes at 9% of global emissions. But what was also notable was by, who was not here, and clearly lots of world leaders, particularly those that do not buy into the climate change agenda, who do not believe it is this kind of state of emergency that some argue it is. People like Donald Trump not here, the Brazilian president not here, certainly leaders from Eastern Europe not here, who feel that actually the climate change agenda could be economically damaging to their nations. The talks do continue today. There has been that focus particularly on smaller island nations, as you pointed out, Rosie, like the Marshall Islands, who've talked about the very fact that this is now a threat immediately right now. Their leader talking about how their capital was underwater only last week. Well, let's get the views of one delegate among 20,000 or so that are here. We've got Leanne, who is from the Hendrik Bowell Foundation in North America, Associate Director. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Leanne, first of all, what do you think the big challenges are at this conference this year as compared to previous ones?
Well, I think the big challenges are going to be actually to make that a COP of action. We are fearing that it's going to be a COP of inaction, particularly, as you pointed out, some of the biggest polluting countries are either in climate change denial or apathetic to actually the needed actions to increase climate ambitions. They are not here. They are not willing to come forward with commitments to increase national climate actions. And that's actually what we need to hear here in order to be able to early next year then come forward with nationally determined contributions, as it's called, with increased climate action. Also, it's quite obvious that obviously leaders here are not responding to the emergency, the climate emergency and the call of peoples. A lot of them are not, besides the United States, Australia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Russia. All of them are actually very inactive here. And we probably will also not see increased financial commitments, which we need to see in order to get developing countries the confidence that they can move forward with climate action.
Now, you specifically also look at this issue of gender and how that might relate to climate change. How might it relate? Because there's not, in some ways, an obvious connection.
No, I think it's very obvious because, climate change is affecting different population groups and different people differently, depending obviously on issues like their poverty, their social status, their access to resources, their participation in political systems. And in all of those areas, women are actually still very much discriminated against and thus are hit by climate impacts more severely than men in many countries without actually being given the agenda and the agency to be change agents. They are usually seen as victims of climate change, and so it's important that a regime like the Framework Convention on Climate Change addresses that. And actually here there is a discussion about the continuation of a climate plan on women's integration in the convention and a gender action plan plan, and we are hoping that that one is going to be a good outcome with a continued gender action plan, with a continued commitment to increase gender integration, and that could start, for example, by increasing the number of women delegates, including the number of women delegates in leadership positions.
Okay, Leanne from the Henrik Paul Foundation in Washington DC, thank you very much indeed for joining us. As we said, the talks do continue today, but actually, as Leanne was pointing out, what is notable, Rosie, is that when you look at all these stands installed behind us, kind of which ones are not here, and many of the big countries like Russia, like Brazil, like Australia don't really seem to be properly represented. Even the United States stall is quite small, and the kind of main drive here from the delegates, as Leanne was also saying, is to try and make this a COP of action rather than maybe a talking shop full of hot air.
Thank you very much, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, live in Madrid.